The saddest songs are never sung to ask for mercy. They are sung to remind the world who it has chosen to lose. Snow drifted through the air in slow, silent spirals, settling over the ancient execution square like a white funeral veil. By dawn, every stone of Blackmore Keep had vanished beneath frost, yet the cold could not quiet the hundreds gathered around the scaffold. Their whispers blended with the moan of the northern wind, eager, impatient, almost celebratory. Executions always drew a crowd. Executions of an Omega drew even more. At the center of the square stood a weathered platform built from dark oak blackened by decades of blood and winter storms. Iron chains dangled from its beams, clinking softly whenever the wind swept across them. Beneath the scaffold, priests of the Moon Temple arranged silver bowls filled with ash, their pale robes fluttering against the frozen ground. Everything had been prepared long before sunrise. Justice, they called it. Far above the crowd, enormous banners bearing the crest of the Ashen Crown snapped against the gray sky. A silver wolf upon a field of midnight blue watched over the kingdom with cold, unblinking eyes. No one noticed when the bells stopped ringing. Instead, another sound rose through the square. Soft, fragile, almost impossible to hear. A woman's voice. Not crying, not begging, singing. Heads slowly turned toward the narrow stone staircase leading beneath the scaffold. She appeared between two royal guards, wrists bound by heavy iron shackles that looked far too large for someone so slight. The chain scraped across the frozen steps with every careful movement she made. Evelyn Carter walked without resistance. She could not have been older than 19. Snowflakes gathered in her long golden hair before melting into shimmering strands that rested against the rough wool cloak draped over her shoulders. Beneath the cloak peeked the faded blue hem of a simple dress, worn from years of careful mending. Her skin, pale against the winter morning, seemed almost luminous beneath the overcast sky. Her face was delicate, almost gentle enough to belong in a painter's portrait rather than on a scaffold built for condemned souls. Her blue-gray eyes never searched the crowd. They remained fixed somewhere beyond it, as though she had already stepped into another world. The melody continued to escape her lips, quiet enough that only those nearest could recognize it. No one knew the song. An elderly woman near the front frowned, clutching the wooden moon pendant around her neck. "I've heard that melody before," she whispered. Her husband shook his head. "No. That hymn disappeared generations ago." The guards exchanged uneasy glances. Even they seemed reluctant to interrupt the music. Every note floated through the frozen air with impossible warmth, weaving between the bare branches overlooking the square. The wind itself appeared to hesitate, carrying the melody farther than any human voice should have traveled. Somewhere in the crowd, a child stopped crying. A frightened horse lowered its head. Even the ravens perched atop the execution beams grew strangely silent. The captain of the royal guard frowned. Enough. His sharp voice cracked through the square. The music did not stop. Evelyn simply closed her eyes. The next verse flowed more softly than before. Not louder. Not desperate. Only accepting. It sounded less like someone facing death and more like someone welcoming an old friend she had expected for a very long time. Several priests exchanged nervous looks. One of them stepped closer to the High Magistrate. "My lord, what is it?" "That isn't an ordinary farewell hymn." The magistrate frowned impatiently. "It is merely the rambling of a frightened Omega." The old priest swallowed. "No." His hands trembled. "It belongs to the first moon." The magistrate laughed dismissively. "Impossible." The old man lowered his voice until it was barely audible. "The last person recorded singing that hymn vanished nearly 1,000 years ago." Before anyone could answer, a distant howl echoed across the northern mountains. Long, deep, ancient. Every wolf within the execution square froze. One after another, warriors staggered as their wolves stirred violently beneath their skin. Some dropped to one knee without understanding why. Others gasped, clutching their chests. The air itself seemed to vibrate. The frightened horses screamed and broke their reins. Every hunting hound tucked its tail and whimpered. The priests stared toward the northern horizon, faces drained of color. Another howl answered the first. Closer this time. Far stronger. It rolled across the kingdom like thunder, shaking frost from rooftops and sending clouds of snow tumbling from the castle walls. The old priest's lips parted in horror. No. His voice cracked. That? He looked at the young Omega still singing beneath the scaffold. Is the king's wolf. And somewhere beyond the snow-covered forests, inside the ancient palace where no sound from the outside world should ever reach, something that had slept for 20 years suddenly opened its eyes. Before we continue, if stories of courage, destiny, and impossible love speak to your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapter of Evelyn's journey. The first howl had not yet faded before another answered it from somewhere beyond the Frostfang Mountains. Then another. And another. Within moments, the entire northern horizon trembled beneath the voices of wolves no human eye could see. Panic rippled through Blackmoor Square. Veteran warriors who had survived border wars clutched at their chests as their wolves clawed violently beneath their skin. Several dropped to one knee without meaning to. Others fought to remain standing, their breathing growing ragged as instincts older than memory surged through their blood. What is happening? Who called them? The King's Patrol? No. A gray-haired elder shook his head, his face drained of every trace of color. Royal wolves never howl without command. Yet the howls continued. Not as cries of war. Not as warnings. They sounded almost desperate. As if they were searching. As if they were answering someone. Standing beneath the scaffold, Evelyn Carter never opened her eyes. The hymn flowed from her lips with gentle certainty, each note softer than falling snow. She was no longer aware of the crowd staring at her. She no longer felt the freezing iron biting into her wrists. Fear had abandoned her hours ago. It had left the moment the prison doors opened before dawn. Death no longer frightened her. Betrayal had already done something far worse. Only yesterday morning she had still believed kindness could change people. She had believed that healing a wounded soul mattered more than bloodlines. She had believed loyalty was stronger than fear. She had been wrong. A bitter winter wind swept across the square, carrying with it the scent of pine and distant smoke. The smell awakened memories she had tried desperately to bury. A tiny wooden cottage hidden beside Silver Creek. Wildflowers blooming beneath spring rain. Her mother's warm hands brushing tangled golden hair before bedtime. You have your father's eyes, her mother used to whisper. But your voice. She would smile as though speaking of something sacred. Your voice belongs to the moon herself. Evelyn had laughed every time. She had never understood. Not until her mother disappeared. Not until the lullaby became the only thing she had left. Afterward, the village stopped singing it. The elders claimed the melody brought misfortune. Some insisted it had been cursed. Others simply refused to speak of it. Only old Mrs. Miriam, the blind herbalist who had helped raise Evelyn after her mother's disappearance, dared repeat the song. Never sing this where wolves can hear you, the old woman had warned one stormy evening. Evelyn had smiled. Why? The old healer's clouded eyes had stared into the fire. Because some songs are older than kingdoms. She never explained further. Years passed. The warning became another forgotten childhood story. Until today. The High Magistrate slammed his silver staff against the frozen platform. Silence. His command echoed through the square. Even the ravens burst from the rooftops. Yet Evelyn continued singing. Not out of defiance. Not because she wished to provoke anyone. The melody simply would not leave her. It seemed to breathe on its own, flowing through her like moonlight across still water. One of the younger priests backed away, crossing himself repeatedly. My lord. The High Magistrate glared. What now? Listen. I hear nothing except a condemned Omega. No. The priest swallowed hard. The wolves. Everyone fell silent. The howling had stopped. For one heartbeat. The entire kingdom seemed to hold its breath. Then every wolf inside Blackmoor Square turned toward the northern palace at exactly the same moment. Hundreds of heads. One direction. One instinct. One impossible command. A deep vibration rolled beneath the earth. Not an earthquake. Footsteps. Massive. Measured. Each impact shook loose snow from rooftops. The execution horses shrieked and broke free from their handlers. The royal guards tightened their grips on their spears, though none understood why their hands were trembling. Far beyond the walls of Blackmoor Keep, inside the obsidian palace, where no stranger had entered for years, Alpha King Lucian Ashford slowly lifted his head from the council table. Silver eyes, cold enough to freeze kingdoms, stared toward the southern horizon. Around him, 12 royal advisors fell silent. No one dared breathe, because every person inside that chamber had just witnessed the impossible. The king's wolf had awakened. For 20 years it had obeyed only discipline, only duty, only silence. Now it growled deep within his chest with a hunger that made the walls themselves seem too small to contain it. Lucian's fingers tightened around the carved armrest until ancient oak splintered beneath his grip. Then, for the first time since taking the throne, his wolf spoke. One single thought echoed through his soul. Find her. The cruelest verdict is not spoken in a courtroom, it is whispered by the people who once called you family. Evelyn had stopped counting the hours she spent inside the stone prison beneath Blackmoor Keep. There were no windows. Only damp walls coated with moss, rusted iron bars, and the endless dripping of icy water somewhere beyond the darkness. Time dissolved in places like this. Morning and night became strangers. The only measure left was the number of footsteps that echoed along the corridor whenever another prisoner disappeared and never returned. 3 nights earlier, she had believed she would be going home. Instead, she had been brought here in chains. She could still remember the smell of fresh bread drifting through the village market that morning. Snow had only begun to fall, dusting the rooftops of Silver Creek in delicate white. Children laughed as they chased one another through the narrow streets, while merchants shouted over piles of apples, dried herbs, and woven blankets. It should have been an ordinary day, until Captain Rowan Hale rode into the square with 12 royal guards. His black stallion stopped directly before Evelyn's healing cottage. Every conversation died. Every smile disappeared. The captain unrolled a parchment bearing the royal seal. Evelyn Carter. She stepped forward, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron. I am Evelyn. His silver eyes studied her with cold precision. You were accused of practicing forbidden moon magic. The words struck the village like lightning. Gasps erupted from every direction. Someone whispered, impossible. Another voice answered, I always thought there was something strange about her. Evelyn stared at the captain, unable to understand. There must be some mistake. There is no mistake. He handed the parchment to the village elder. The evidence has already been reviewed. Evidence. The word echoed through her mind. What evidence? She healed broken bones. She stitched wounds. She brewed medicine from herbs growing along the riverbanks. Nothing more. Nothing less. The crowd slowly parted. Standing near the fountain was a young woman dressed in expensive crimson velvet. Vivian Ashcroft, the mayor's daughter. Only 6 days earlier, Evelyn had saved Vivian's younger brother after a hunting accident left him bleeding beneath frozen rocks. She had worked through the entire night to keep the boy alive. Vivian had cried in gratitude. She had embraced Evelyn before everyone. Now, she refused to meet Evelyn's eyes. Instead, she lowered her head. As if ashamed. No. As if hiding. Evelyn's heart tightened. You know I didn't do this, she whispered. Vivian's fingers trembled around the fur cloak wrapped across her shoulders. Her voice almost broke. But before another word could leave her lips, the mayor stepped forward. My daughter saw a strange light pouring from your hands. Murmurs swept through the villagers. It wasn't witchcraft. Evelyn looked desperately from one familiar face to another. You all know why my hands glowed. No one answered. She remembered little Noah's fever finally breaking. Old Martha walking again after months of pain. Children bringing her wildflowers every spring. Farmers leaving fresh milk on her doorstep as thanks. Every smile. Every act of kindness. Every life she had helped. None of it mattered now. Fear erased gratitude faster than winter erased footprints. Mrs. Miriam, the blind herbalist who had raised Evelyn after her mother's disappearance, tried pushing through the crowd. She has never harmed anyone. Two guards restrained the old woman before she reached the square. You cannot take her. The elderly healer struggled despite her age. You fools don't understand who she. A guard shoved her backward. She fell heavily onto the frozen stones. Evelyn instinctively lunged toward her. Chains had not yet been placed around her wrists, but 4 soldiers blocked her path with drawn spears. Don't touch her, Evelyn cried. Mrs. Miriam slowly lifted herself onto trembling hands. Blood trickled from a cut above her brow. Yet her clouded eyes searched only for Evelyn. There was no fear in them, only heartbreak. Child. The old woman's voice barely rose above the wind. No matter what happens. She paused, swallowing tears. Never stop singing. The captain frowned. Take the prisoner. Iron cuffs snapped shut around Evelyn's wrists. Their icy weight seemed impossibly heavy for such simple chains. As the guards led her through the silent village, no one stepped forward. No one protested. Doors quietly closed. Curtains were drawn. People she had healed lowered their eyes as she passed. Not because they hated her. Because they were afraid. Evelyn finally understood something her mother had once said. Fear was louder than truth. Behind her, Mrs. Miriam called out one final time. The moon remembers what men choose to forget. Those words followed Evelyn all the way to Blackmore Keep. Now, standing beneath the execution scaffold 3 days later, she realized they were the last words anyone had spoken to her with love. And somewhere inside the palace, as Lucien's wolf continued to growl with impossible urgency, an old memory stirred deep within the Alpha King's mind, a forgotten lullaby his own mother had sung before the night she vanished forever. The growl did not come from Lucien's throat. It came from somewhere far deeper, somewhere that had remained silent for 2 decades. The council chamber inside Ashen Palace fell into absolute stillness. 12 advisors stood frozen around the long obsidian table, their expressions caught between disbelief and fear. Documents lay forgotten beneath trembling hands. Ink slowly dripped from overturned quills onto maps that had determined the fate of kingdoms only moments before. No one dared speak. Alpha King Lucien Ashford remained seated at the head of the table, his broad shoulders perfectly still, yet every instinct in the room screamed that something ancient had awakened. A jagged crack spread beneath his gloved hand. The carved oak armrest shattered into splinters. His silver eyes remained fixed on the southern horizon, though thick stone walls stood between him and the outside world. He wasn't looking. He was listening. The melody. Faint. Almost impossible to hear. Yet every note reached him with startling clarity. It slipped through stone, through distance, through memory itself. His heartbeat became uneven. That had never happened before. Not during war. Not during assassination attempts. Not even on the night he inherited the throne after his father's death. One of the council elders cautiously stepped forward. Your Majesty. No answer. Another deep growl vibrated inside Lucien's chest. The sound seemed too powerful to belong to any human being. Several advisors instinctively took a step backward. General Cedric Hawthorne slowly reached for the sword hanging at his side. Not to threaten the king. To protect everyone else. My king. Cedric spoke carefully. Should I summon the Royal Wolf Guard? Lucien finally blinked. No. His voice remained calm. Too calm. But his wolf was anything but. Inside his mind, darkness rippled like black water beneath a full moon. Golden eyes slowly opened within that darkness. Eyes he had spent 20 years forcing into silence. His wolf. Enormous. Ancient. Restless. The beast paced endlessly beneath invisible chains forged through discipline and years of absolute control. Lucien had mastered every instinct since childhood. An Alpha King could not afford weakness. Desire clouded judgment. Emotion destroyed kingdoms. His father had repeated those lessons until they became law. Control your wolf. Never obey it. Never trust it. Especially when it whispers about destiny. Yet today, the wolf was no longer whispering. It was roaring. Find her. The command struck Lucien like thunder. Find her. Again. Louder. The beast slammed against invisible barriers inside his soul. Stone pillars surrounding the council chamber trembled. Silver goblets rattled across the table. One shattered against the floor. Cedric's face lost all color. Your Majesty. Lucien slowly rose. The movement should have appeared graceful. Instead, it carried the restrained force of a predator barely contained beneath human skin. His black cloak slid from the back of the throne, pooling across polished marble like spreading shadows. The advisors instinctively lowered their heads. Not out of protocol. Out of instinct. The king's pheromones had changed. Normally, they carried the cold certainty of winter steel. Now something older flooded the chamber. Wild forests after rain. Moonlit earth. The scent of a wolf preparing to claim something that belonged to him. Several Beta officials struggled to breathe. An elderly Omega scribe collapsed onto one knee. No one understood why. Lucien barely noticed. The melody continued. One note after another. Each one tugged at something buried beneath years of silence. Then, a memory surfaced. Small hands wrapped around his fingers. A warm fireplace. A woman's gentle voice singing while snow fell beyond palace windows. He had not remembered that night in years. His mother, Queen Eleanor. She had sung the very same melody. Not all of it. Only the beginning. She had smiled before pressing a kiss against his forehead. If you ever hear the rest of the song. Her voice echoed through the corridors of memory. Follow it. Young Lucien had laughed. Why? She brushed a strand of dark hair away from his eyes. Because only one soul can finish it. The memory shattered. His mother's face disappeared into darkness, exactly as it had the night she vanished without explanation. Lucien staggered half a step. Impossible. He had searched for answers his entire life. Every witness had died. Every record had vanished. Even the lullaby had disappeared from the kingdom. Yet someone was singing it now. Not merely the first verse. The entire hymn. His wolf threw back its head and held inside his soul with such overwhelming force that Lucien finally understood. This was never coincidence. This was recognition. Outside the palace, another chorus of wolves answered. Hundreds. Perhaps thousands. Their voices rolled across valleys and frozen rivers until even the palace guards exchanged frightened glances. Captain Elias rushed into the chamber without waiting for permission. He stopped abruptly after seeing the king's expression. My lord. His breathing was uneven. Reports are arriving from every province. Lucien looked toward him. What reports? The captain swallowed. Every wolf in the north has turned toward Blackmoor Keep. Silence. They refuse every command. Another pause. They're all trying to reach the execution square. Lucien closed his eyes. Far away. He heard her voice again. Softer now. More fragile. The song was nearing its end. His wolf uttered only 3 words. Too late. Lucien's silver eyes snapped open. Prepare my horse. Cedric hesitated. My king, the council. There is no council. His voice cut through the chamber like drawn steel. There is only her. Before another soul could object, Lucien was already striding toward the palace doors, unaware that every second he delayed brought Evelyn Carter one heartbeat closer to the executioner's blade. The executioner's hands were steady. Evelyn's heart was even steadier. Snow continued to fall across Blackmoor Square, softening the cruel outlines of the gallows until they resembled a monument rather than an instrument of death. White flakes settled upon Evelyn's golden hair and melted against her pale skin, tracing cold paths down her cheeks that looked almost like tears. Almost. But she was not crying. She had already shed every tear the night she realized no one was coming to save her. The High Magistrate stepped onto the platform, his silver robes sweeping across frost-covered wood. In one hand he carried the ancient book of lunar law. In the other rested a ceremonial dagger carved from moonstone, its blade gleaming beneath the gray winter sky. He raised both arms. People of Blackmoor. His voice thundered across the silent square. You stand here today to witness justice. The crowd answered with scattered applause. Some cheered. Others lowered their heads. Many remained silent, unwilling to celebrate but too frightened to object. The magistrate opened the weathered book. Evelyn Carter. She lifted her eyes. You have been found guilty of practicing forbidden moon magic, concealing ancient rituals, and conspiring against the Ashen Crown. Each accusation echoed through the square. She listened without protest, because every denial had already been ignored. The punishment for such crimes. The magistrate paused dramatically. Is death before the eyes of the kingdom. A heavy silence followed. Then, according to tradition, an elderly priest stepped forward carrying a small silver bowl filled with clear spring water. He dipped trembling fingers into it before gently touching Evelyn's forehead. The moon grants every condemned soul one final mercy. His voice was far kinder than the magistrate's. You may speak your last words. The entire square waited. Some expected curses. Others expected desperate pleas. A few hoped she would finally confess. Evelyn looked toward the snow-covered mountains far beyond the city walls. The wind carried the scent of pine forests she would never see again. She smiled. Only slightly. I have no final words. Confused murmurs spread through the crowd. The old priest blinked. Then, he hesitated. Would you offer one final prayer? She slowly shook her head. Instead, she closed her eyes. The first note rose almost as softly as a whisper. No speech. No farewell. Only song. The melody drifted across the square with quiet grace, gentle enough to calm frightened children, yet powerful enough to silence every conversation. It was unlike any hymn sung within the Moon Temple. Its rhythm flowed like water beneath moonlight. Ancient. Timeless. Beautiful enough to make sorrow itself seem sacred. The executioner lowered his axe without realizing it. One guard removed his helmet. An old woman in the crowd suddenly covered her mouth as tears spilled freely down her face. I know this song, she whispered. But that's impossible. The melody continued. Verse after verse. No hesitation. No fear. Each note carried memories Evelyn herself barely understood. Her mother's embrace. The warmth of a fireplace. The scent of lavender drying beside an open window. The lullaby that had followed every nightmare. The only inheritance her mother had left behind. The old priest slowly staggered backward. His hands began to shake uncontrollably. His eyes widened as recognition dawned. No, he breathed. The hymn of returning. Another priest stared at him. What did you say? The elder swallowed. I thought it was only legend. The younger priest frowned. What legend? Before the old man could answer, every torch surrounding the execution square flickered. Then burned brighter. Without anyone touching them. A sudden gust swept across the platform. Not cold. Warm. As though spring itself had wandered into the middle of winter. The snow stopped falling. Not gradually. Instantly. Thousands of white flakes simply froze in the air. Suspended. Motionless. The crowd gasped. Even the magistrate stepped backward. What sorcery is this? No sorcery. The old priest whispered, unable to take his eyes off Evelyn. This is older. Far beyond Blackmore. Across frozen rivers. Across endless forests. Across mountains crowned with ice. The song continued. Invisible. Unstoppable. It reached every wolf within the northern kingdom. Mothers stopped nursing their pups. Hunters abandoned fresh kills. Ancient alphas lifted their heads toward the sky. Even wolves too old to stand struggled onto trembling legs. One by one, they answered. Their howls merged into a chorus so vast that the earth itself seemed to remember something long forgotten. Inside Ashen Palace, stable doors exploded open before servants could unlatch them. The king's black warhorse reared violently, snapping thick leather restraints as if they were thread. Royal wolves threw themselves against iron gates. Soldiers shouted in confusion. No command could calm them, because they were no longer obeying men. They were answering the song. Lucian swung himself into the saddle before anyone could prepare an escort. Captain Elias rushed after him. My king, the roads are dangerous. Lucian never looked back. His silver eyes burned with a determination none of his generals had ever witnessed. His wolf spoke again. Not with words this time. With certainty. She is dying. The king's hands tightened around the reins. The black stallion launched forward like a storm unleashed, its iron-shod hooves striking sparks from frozen stone as Lucien raced toward Blackmore Keep with only one desperate thought echoing through his soul. Please, don't let me be too late. No one realized the kingdom had already stopped breathing. Blackmore Square stood suspended between one heartbeat and the next. The executioner's hands remained locked around the polished ashwood handle of his enormous axe, but his muscles refused to obey. Years of discipline urged him to finish the sentence. Something older buried inside his blood begged him to wait. Around the scaffold, every werewolf, alpha, beta, and omega alike, stood unnaturally still. Their wolves had fallen silent. Not because they were calm, because they were listening. Evelyn's song drifted upward, delicate as moonlight upon frozen water. It no longer sounded like the voice of a frightened young woman awaiting death. It carried the quiet certainty of someone remembering a promise made long before kingdoms were built. She did not know where the next words came from. She had never learned them. Her mother had never sung this verse. Yet the melody continued to unfold inside her heart as though someone invisible walked beside her, whispering each forgotten line into her soul. A warm breeze brushed against her cheek. Impossible. Winter still surrounded the square. Yet she caught the unmistakable fragrance of blooming white lilies. The same flowers that had grown beside her childhood home every spring. Evelyn slowly opened her eyes. For only an instant. She thought she saw her mother standing beyond the crowd. White dress. Golden hair dancing gently in the wind. The familiar smile that had vanished years ago. Then the vision dissolved into drifting snow. Tears finally gathered in Evelyn's eyes. Not tears of fear. Tears of longing. I miss you, she whispered so softly that only the wind seemed to hear. Far away, Lucien's black stallion thundered across the frozen plains. Branches snapped beneath powerful hooves. Ice shattered wherever the horse landed. Captain Elias and 20 members of the Royal Wolf Guard struggled to keep pace, but with every passing mile the distance between them and their king grew wider. Lucien rode as though death itself chased him. His cloak whipped violently behind him. Snow lashed against his face. He never slowed. Inside him, his wolf paced with unbearable urgency. Faster. Every instinct screamed the same command. Faster. Lucien leaned lower over the horse's neck. The world became a blur of white forests and dark cliffs. He had no explanation. Only certainty. The girl singing that ancient hymn could not die. Back at the execution square, the High Magistrate's patience finally shattered. This madness ends now. His voice cracked across the frozen silence. He pointed directly at the executioner. Carry out the sentence. The executioner did not move. Sweat rolled down his temples despite the freezing air. My lord. His voice trembled. My wolf. The magistrate's expression hardened. I gave you an order. The executioner swallowed painfully. I cannot. Gasps swept through the crowd. The magistrate stepped closer. You refuse the crown? No. The large warrior lowered his head. I physically cannot lift the blade. The High Magistrate seized the axe himself. If none of you possess the courage. His hands wrapped around the heavy handle. Then I shall finish this. With a furious roar, he lifted the weapon high above his head. The crowd cried out. Evelyn looked up. Not at the axe. At the gray sky beyond it. Her lips curved into the smallest smile. The final verse had almost ended. Then a deafening howl exploded directly above the execution square. Not from the mountains. Not from the forests. From the heavens themselves. The sound struck like thunder. Every window in Blackmore Keep shattered at once. Church bells rang wildly without human hands. Thousands of ravens burst from rooftops, black wings swallowing the sky. The magistrate staggered backward as the axe slipped from his grasp and crashed harmlessly onto the wooden platform. A blinding column of silver light descended from the clouds. It surrounded Evelyn without burning her, without touching anyone else. Ancient runes shimmered beneath the snow. No one had carved them. They simply appeared, glowing beneath the scaffold in an enormous circular pattern older than any language known to the kingdom. The old priest fell to both knees. His voice broke into sobs. The first moon. People stared at him in terror. What is happening? He could barely breathe. It is answering her. Across the square, wolves lowered themselves onto their forelegs one after another. Not forced. Not commanded. Reverent. Even the fiercest alpha warriors bowed their heads without understanding why. An invisible pressure settled over every soul present. No one dared speak. No one dared move. At the very edge of the glowing circle, Evelyn remained perfectly still. The silver light danced gently through her golden hair. The iron shackles around her wrists suddenly cracked. One fracture, then another. With a sharp metallic snap, both chains fell onto the platform. She never touched them. The crowd recoiled in horror. The magistrate stared in disbelief. "No," he whispered. "She cannot be." Before he could finish, a palace messenger burst through the outer gates on a lathered horse, shouting so desperately that his voice echoed against the castle walls. "Make way." His horse barely slowed. "Make way for the Alpha King." Every face turned toward the northern road. In the distance, beyond swirling curtains of snow, a lone rider emerged like a shadow racing through the storm. And the closer he came, the louder every wolf in the kingdom began to howl. The king did not arrive with an army. He arrived with a storm. The thunder of iron-shod hooves rolled across the frozen valley long before anyone could see the rider. It echoed through Blackmoor Keep, rattling wooden shutters and shaking snow from the ancient stone walls. Every face in Blackmoor Square turned toward the northern road. At first, there was only a dark shape racing through the blizzard. Then came the Black Stallion. Its powerful muscles cut through the drifting snow like a creature born from the night itself. White frost exploded beneath every stride, leaving a trail that shimmered beneath the pale winter sun. Upon its back rode Alpha King Lucian Ashford. His black cloak whipped behind him like enormous raven wings. Silver eyes burned beneath windswept dark hair. He looked less like a king returning to his people and more like a warrior summoned by fate itself. Behind him, the royal wolf guard struggled desperately to keep pace. No one had ever seen their king ride this recklessly. Not during war. Not during rebellion. Not even when neighboring kingdoms had threatened invasion. Yet today, he rode as though every heartbeat mattered. As though one more second might cost him the entire world. Inside Lucian's chest, his wolf no longer growled. It howled. Louder than the storm. Closer than his own heartbeat. She is there. His fingers tightened around the reins until the leather creaked beneath his grip. "I know." The words escaped his lips before he realized he had spoken aloud. The stallion surged even faster. Ahead, Blackmoor Keep finally came into view beyond the curtain of snow. At that exact moment, Evelyn's song reached its final verse. The silver light surrounding the scaffold began to pulse gently, each heartbeat of radiance growing brighter than the last. The glowing runes beneath her feet spread outward through the frozen earth like roots awakening after centuries of sleep. People stumbled backward in terror. Several guards abandoned their weapons. Children clung to their mothers. Even seasoned warriors looked ready to flee. The High Magistrate forced himself to remain standing. "This is illusion." His voice cracked with desperation. "Do not fear witchcraft." No one answered. Because everyone had noticed the same impossible thing. The light did not come from Evelyn. It came from above. From the moon itself. Though it was broad daylight. The elderly priest slowly approached the glowing circle, tears streaming freely down his weathered face. He reached into his robes and withdrew an ancient medallion shaped like a crescent moon. Its silver surface had remained dull for decades. Now, it shone with the same radiant light surrounding Evelyn. The old man's knees buckled. "I've waited my whole life," he whispered, "to witness this." The magistrate grabbed the priest by the shoulder. "What are you talking about?" The old man looked up with trembling eyes. "The prophecy." "There is no prophecy." "There is." His voice carried surprising strength. "You destroyed every written copy." The magistrate's face froze. For one brief moment, fear crossed his eyes. Real fear. Before he could silence the priest, a deafening crash exploded from the outer gates. The massive oak doors burst inward. Not broken. Thrown open with such force that iron hinges ripped from solid stone. Wind rushed through the entrance. Snow spiraled wildly into the square. Standing within the swirling white stood Lucien. He had already dismounted before anyone noticed. His black stallion continued galloping riderless across the courtyard while the king strode forward with calm, measured steps. Each footfall echoed through the silent square. No herald announced him. None was needed. The crowd instinctively divided before him, like water parting before an approaching ship. Heads bowed. Bodies knelt. No royal command had been given. Respect alone forced them downward. Lucien barely noticed. His eyes searched only one face, one voice, one impossible melody. Then he saw her. Evelyn stood within the circle of silver light, golden hair dancing softly in a wind no one else could feel. The broken shackles rested at her feet. She looked impossibly small beneath the towering scaffold, and impossibly beautiful. The world around Lucien disappeared. The frightened crowd, the priests, the guards, even the roaring wind. Only Evelyn remained. His wolf became utterly silent. Not because it had calmed, because it had finally found what it had been searching for. There she is. Lucien stopped walking. For the first time in 20 years, he forgot how to breathe. Across the square, Evelyn slowly lifted her eyes. Their gazes met. A strange warmth spread through her chest. She had never seen the Alpha King before. Yet something deep within her recognized him. Not the crown. Not the armor. Him. The melody left her lips unfinished. Silence settled between them. Not an empty silence. One so full that every soul present felt it pressing against their own heart. The bond neither of them understood had already begun weaving itself together. Then Lucien took one final step toward the scaffold. His wolf spoke only once. "Mine." The word echoed through his soul with absolute certainty. Unfortunately, the High Magistrate heard something else entirely. He mistook the king's silence for hesitation. Believing he still held authority over the execution, the magistrate slowly reached down, wrapped trembling fingers around the fallen executioner's axe, and lifted it toward Evelyn once again. "Touch her, and you challenge the throne itself." The High Magistrate tightened both hands around the executioner's axe. Its polished steel blade caught the pale winter light as he raised it above his head. His arms trembled, not from the weapon's weight, but from the fear clawing at his heart. Everything was slipping away. The glowing runes, the silver light, the impossible hymn, the king's arrival. If the girl remained alive for even another minute, questions would begin. Questions he had spent years making certain no one would ever ask. "This ends now." His desperate cry echoed through the frozen square. He swung the axe downward. Time seemed to slow. Snowflakes hung motionless in the air. The silver light surrounding Evelyn shimmered like liquid moonlight. She never flinched. Instead, she looked quietly into Lucien's silver eyes. For reasons she could not explain, every fear inside her disappeared. She did not know this man. Yet something within her whispered, "You're safe." The blade rushed toward her. It never reached its target. A deafening metallic crash exploded across the square. Sparks burst into the air. The executioner's axe spun violently away, tumbling across the wooden platform before embedding itself deep into one of the scaffold's pillars. The force behind the impact shocked everyone into silence. Lucien stood between Evelyn and the fallen weapon. He had drawn his sword so quickly that almost no one had seen him move. Only the ringing of steel remained. The king's obsidian blade rested calmly in his hand. Not a single scratch marked its dark surface. The High Magistrate stumbled backward. Your Majesty." Lucien said nothing. His expression remained cold, almost frighteningly calm. That silence terrified the magistrate more than any shouted accusation ever could. The king slowly lowered his sword. Then he looked directly at the man who had nearly executed Evelyn. Who, he asked quietly, gave you permission? The question floated through the square like a blade. The magistrate swallowed. My king, she was lawfully convicted. Lucien took one measured step forward. Answer. Another step. Who? The distance between them shrank. Gave. The magistrate's breathing became uneven. You. Even seasoned soldiers instinctively backed away. Permission. Lucien stopped less than an arm's length away. To raise a weapon. His silver eyes burned with restrained fury. Against someone my wolf has claimed? Silence. Absolute silence. The word struck every werewolf present harder than thunder. Claimed. No one breathed. Captain Elias, who had finally reached the square with the Royal Wolf Guard, froze where he stood. Even Cedric, who had known Lucien since childhood, stared in disbelief. The king had never claimed anyone. Not even once. The High Magistrate's lips trembled. That cannot be. Lucien slowly turned toward Evelyn. The silver light surrounding her reflected in his eyes. His wolf, silent only moments before, now rested peacefully inside him. Not because its hunger had faded, because she stood within reach. Evelyn watched him with quiet confusion. Her heartbeat had become strangely calm. As if she had finally arrived somewhere she had unknowingly searched for all her life. Lucien noticed the raw skin around her wrists where the iron shackles had rubbed against her flesh. Thin crimson marks circled both wrists. Something ancient awakened inside him. Possessive. Protective. Furious. Without thinking, he removed the heavy black fur cloak from his shoulders. The winter wind immediately wrapped around him, yet he seemed not to notice the cold. He stepped into the circle of silver light. The runes beneath his boots flared brighter. Several priests gasped. It accepted him. The old priest whispered. Lucien gently lifted the cloak around Evelyn's shoulders. His movements were surprisingly careful. Almost reverent. As though afraid even the rough fabric might hurt her. The oversized cloak settled around her small frame, shielding her from the bitter wind. Their fingers brushed. The instant their skin touched, a brilliant pulse of silver light erupted from the ancient runes. The shockwaves swept across the square. Every wolf dropped instantly onto one knee. Royal guards. Hunters. Village alphas. Even Lucien's elite warriors bowed without choice. Their wolves had recognized something before their human minds could understand. Evelyn gasped softly. A strange warmth spread from her fingertips through her entire body. She looked up. Lucien was already staring at her. Not with desire. Not with curiosity. With recognition. Like a traveler who had wandered through endless darkness only to discover the light he had been searching for since birth. Then, without warning, images flashed through both their minds. An enormous white tree beneath a full moon. A silver crown resting upon an ancient stone altar. A little boy with silver eyes laughing beside a little girl whose golden hair shimmered beneath moonlight. Then, darkness. Blood. Fire. Someone screaming. The vision shattered. Evelyn staggered. Lucien instinctively caught her before she could fall. His arm wrapped protectively around her. The entire kingdom watched in stunned silence. The Alpha King, the most feared ruler in the north, was holding a condemned Omega as though she were the most precious thing he had ever touched. Then the elderly priest slowly stood, tears flowing freely down his face. His trembling voice carried across the motionless square. The prophecy was incomplete. Every eye turned toward him. He looked at Evelyn. Then at Lucien. Before whispering the words that would change the fate of the kingdom forever. They are not merely fated mates. They are not merely fated mates. They're the heirs of a promise the moon refused to let die. The old priest's trembling words drifted across Blackmore Square like falling ash. No one moved. No one dared breathe. Even the winter wind seemed to vanish beneath the crushing silence. Lucien slowly turned toward the elderly priest. His silver eyes narrowed. What did you say? The old man lowered himself completely onto both knees. Not before the king. Before the two souls standing together inside the circle of silver light. His weathered hands shook so violently that the ancient moon medallion slipped from his fingers and landed softly upon the frozen platform. It was hidden, he whispered. For generations. The High Magistrate suddenly stepped forward. Enough. His voice cracked with panic. He's an old fool. Arrest him immediately. Not a single guard moved. They remained kneeling, heads lowered, unable to force their wolves into disobedience. The magistrate looked around in disbelief. I gave you an order. Captain Elias slowly lifted his eyes. We obey the king. The magistrate's face drained of color. Lucien never looked away from the old priest. Continue. The elderly man swallowed painfully. There were once two bloodlines blessed beneath the first moon. His voice grew steadier. One carried the crown. He looked toward Lucien. The other carried the song. Then his gaze shifted to Evelyn. They were never meant to rule separately. A murmur swept through the square. The priest continued. When darkness nearly consumed the kingdom 1,000 years ago, the moon divided the blessing. The king's bloodline would inherit strength. The queen's bloodline would inherit remembrance. Lucien felt Evelyn tense, slightly beneath his protective arm. She was listening as carefully as he was. The prophecy said. The old man closed his eyes, reciting words he had memorized decades earlier. When the song returns, the wolf shall answer. When the wolf kneels, the crown shall awaken. When both stand beneath the moon together. His voice faltered. The forgotten kingdom shall remember its true queen. Silence followed. The words settled over the square with impossible weight. Evelyn stared at the old priest. Queen. Her voice was barely above a whisper. There must be some mistake. The old man smiled sadly. Your mother believed you would say that. Evelyn's breath caught. You knew my mother? I did. The answer struck her harder than any blade. I served beside Queen Eleanor before she disappeared. Lucien froze. His heart skipped a beat. My mother. The old priest slowly nodded. She protected a terrible secret. The king's voice became dangerously quiet. What secret? Before the priest could answer, no. The High Magistrate lunged forward. A small dagger flashed from inside his sleeve. His face twisted with desperation. If the truth lives. He drove the blade toward the old priest's heart. Lucien moved first. The sword in his hand became nothing more than a streak of black steel. A sharp clang echoed through the square. The dagger flew from the magistrate's grasp, spinning high into the air before disappearing into the snow. The king did not stop there. With one swift motion, he caught the magistrate by the throat and lifted him effortlessly from the ground. Gasps erupted from the crowd. The king's expression remained frighteningly calm. Only his silver eyes betrayed the fury burning beneath years of perfect discipline. You tried to execute an innocent woman. His grip tightened. You attempted to murder a witness. Another inch. You interrupted sacred law. The magistrate clawed desperately at Lucien's arm, unable to breathe. His voice broke. I was protecting the kingdom. Lucien asked quietly. The man laughed weakly. No. His terrified eyes darted toward Evelyn. Myself. Those two words echoed through the frozen square. Evelyn stared at him in disbelief. You knew. Tears welled inside her eyes. You knew I was innocent. The magistrate could no longer meet her gaze. For years he had buried records. Destroyed scrolls. Silenced priests. Anyone who remembered the ancient prophecy had disappeared. Everything had been planned. Everything. Except the song. Lucien slowly lowered the trembling man onto the platform. Not from mercy. Because he wanted every person in Blackmoor to hear what came next. Speak. The king's voice carried absolute authority. Tell them everything. The magistrate's shoulders collapsed. His spirit seemed to leave him all at once. It began. He whispered. The night Queen Eleanor vanished. Lucien's heartbeat thundered inside his chest. Evelyn instinctively reached for his hand. Their fingers intertwined without thought. The silver runes beneath their feet erupted once more, brighter than before. Far above the clouds, hidden behind the pale winter daylight, the outline of an enormous full moon briefly appeared. Every wolf throughout the northern kingdom lifted its head toward the heavens and answered with one united howl. The old priest slowly smiled through tears. The moon has accepted them. No one noticed that, beneath the ancient scaffold, the frozen earth had begun to crack open. Deep below Blackmore Keep, something sealed away for 1,000 years had just awakened. And it had been waiting. For the king. And for the girl who remembered the forgotten song.